Hi, and welcome to Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. My goodness, it seems such a long time ago. I almost think I grew a beard. But anyway, nice to have you here. We're glad to be back with you. And we have a returning guest today, one of our favorites, newspaper lady, trailblazer in her own right, Carla Jean Whitley, who some of you might remember joined us a ways back with her book on the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio. And talk about going kind of 180. Again, it'd be interesting about this book. Carla has written a book about Birmingham Beer, a heady history of brewing in the Magic City. And again, it's more than just about beer. It's about probably tastes and politics and likes and dislikes, and I think it's going to make for a good conversation. Carla Jean is a former features reporter for Alabama Media Group, and currently, and we'll try to talk through a little bit about that as we go along, she's now currently the outdoor and entertainment editor at the Glenwood's Spring Post Independent in Colorado. So welcome to Studio 411, Carla Jean Whitley. Carla, nice to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
There we go. So now tell me, quite a, to me anyway, quite a change from the book you did on the music and the storied history. This has got a kind of a storied history that I really didn't expect to experience. What was the idea behind you doing this book?
Well, much like my first book, it came to me. So one day, several years ago, I received an email out of the blue from Jerry Hartley, who owns the J. Clyde in Birmingham, Alabama. It is arguably the best, I will say the best, beer bar in the state of Alabama. And he had received an email from an editor at the History Press who said, "We want to do a book about beer in Birmingham. We suspect one of your patrons is the author. Who is it?" Jerry forwarded me that email, and of course, at the time, I was already working on a book for the History Press, the Muscle Shoals book. So I emailed them and said, "Hey, I don't know if the timing is going to work on this, but I'd love to talk to you." Initially, the timing was looking to be a problem because, I kind of had this other book that I was working on, but we were able to work things out, and this book came out almost exactly a year after the Shoals book.
So, and I'm sure people don't realize that, again, from many of the authors we've had on Studio 411, that, there's a lengthy amount of time. It's not like writing a term paper and doing it in a week. I mean, these books take a fair amount of time, especially when you're doing all the research that you have to do.
Your audio cut out, so I have no idea what you just said.
Okay. Here we go. I said, like the Muscle Shoals book, a lot of people think that, it's kind of like writing a term paper. It's like, let me put my head to the grindstone for a week or 10 days or less, most times less, and then next thing, okay, all done, ready to submit. Like the Muscle Shoals book, I'm sure these books take, months, if not in some cases, years to put together because of all the research involved.
Well, I sure wish I had years, but the truth is actually probably closer to the term paper than you might think. I spent quite a lot of time researching this book, of course, and that included digging into the beer history that was near to the city's founding in the late 1800s. But I'd also been covering the development of the craft beer scene in Birmingham for several years already. That's why Jerry reached out to me in the first place, because I wrote the first article about the J. Clyde. And so I gathered research while I was on my book tour for the Muscle Shoals book, but I actually wrote the beer book in about a month.
Really? Okay. Well, I think
I don't recommend it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, especially to me when you're doing history. I know with fiction, sometimes people that I know, they get on a roll, and next thing they're pumping a book out right away, and it's a matter of weeks. So this is quite an achievement that you did this. One of the things in the beginning of the book, which I think is very helpful to anyone reading the book, is again you provide a timeline. And actually, I was going to say, you stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to ask you about your first craft beer experience, because you were kind of like, what was it, a Bud Light girl? I mean, you were...
Oh, yes.
So, I mean,
Definitely.
how did that come about? I mean, at that point, you're living in Alabama for a number of years. Did someone say to you, hey, come on out and then, try this? And you're like, I don't know, I want to try this. I've got my usual favorite.
No, there was not much of a craft beer scene in Alabama at that time. So what happened was in 2008, I was working on an article for Birmingham Magazine about new bars in town and some old favorites. I was visiting one of those old favorites, the Blue Monkey on Cobb Lane, and somebody had told me, you have to go to the J. Clyde. It's right next door, just pop in there. The first time I kind of peered through the doorway, I thought, I don't know about this. There was a tool on the walls, and they were going for some atmosphere, but there wasn't really anybody there. So my friend and I went next door, had a martini at the Blue Monkey, and then came back to the J. Clyde. I'll do almost anything for a story, and so I walked in, still didn't see much of anybody. We walked down this funny little hall and popped out at a bar. So we sat down at the bar and grabbed a couple of menus, and they didn't have Bud Light or Miller Lite or Coors Light or any of those beers that people rattle off when you ask a server, oh, what beer do you have? And they say, oh, we've got everything. No, you don't have everything. And in fact, I would call that nothing at all. So I said to the bartender, explain to me what's going on here. What is this? What is this on your menu? There are a couple things I had heard of, but mostly it was all brand new to me. And so that began my craft beer education.
Now, the city of Birmingham, now another thing too, and this is something I saw on one of your social media posts. I know, again, more familiar with Birmingham or Birmingham, depending on how they pronounce it in England. How do the folks in Alabama pronounce the name of the city?
Birmingham.
So that's
we are Southern. It is different.
Okay. So no, that's how I was pronouncing it. I thought, but I thought someone had said, well, no, he's not saying it. Maybe I slipped into the English pronunciation, the Great Britain pronunciation. But anyway,
it's a lovely town too.
Yes, kind of a working class coal mining, manufacturing back in the day.
Yep.
A group, the Animals, I think, came from Birmingham back in England back in the 60s. But anyway, the city, in this case, came to existence in 1871. And again, the early history of beer, I mean, it seemed like it was progressing like anything else. You had this one gentleman, Philip Schellinger, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He opened up the first brewery. And in 1885, but in those days, again, the reason with this whole thing with almost like a bias towards beer, and I didn't sense it with liquors or wine, but again, was it a religious thing, or I mean, kind of help us out here. Is there something I'm missing about maybe that part of the U.S. and Alabama that was so anti-spirits or beer?
Well, have you spent much time in the South? There's still a lot that's influenced by religion and the idea that Sunday is God's day. It's not for alcohol. So, of course, the brewing scene in Birmingham got going big in the late 1800s. People compared it to a town in the Wild West and claimed that there was a saloon on every corner. Birmingham went dry before the rest of the country entered Prohibition, much earlier. And part of that was because people thought, well, we need to clean up around here. People are getting in trouble. There's too much alcohol. This isn't God's will. In fact, one of my favorite images from the book is on the back cover, a photo of the Women's Christian Temperance Union picketing against alcohol.
There you go. I'm going to see if one of our camera people can get a shot of this. Jen, can you try to zoom in on this? So this, if we can zoom in on this shot, Jen. Again, this is, as I was saying, knowing a little bit kind of that, I call it the Bates-Duggar mentality. It's that, a lot of that is very, oh, we don't mix that. I mean, some of them even like, oh, wine. Well, they use grape juice. I'm thinking, again, that's religion is not my thing, so I'm not going to get into a debate or a theories on religion, but it just amazes me. I'm all for Sunday being a day where, hey, if it was up to me, there would still be blue laws where businesses wouldn't be open. But unfortunately, those days, at least up here in the Northeast, have come and gone. Now it's, everybody's open 24/7, and even now here in Connecticut, you can purchase liquor even on Sunday. So it's. I don't know. Some would say that was God's will, but as I said, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Why did they get the moniker Magic City? What was the reason behind that? Any idea?
Oh, yeah. It's because of the city's rapid growth. So Birmingham is a post-Civil War city, and it really sprung up from the crossing of train tracks. The city has the materials in nature needed to make steel. And so it is a great manufacturing hub. Naturally, that's changed a lot over the years, but the growth in population was just dramatic once those elements were found to be all right there next to one another.
There you go.
After Birmingham, England, is because of that shared industrial history.
Exactly. We talked about Mr. Schillinger before, opening up Birmingham's first brewery. Just to give you some information, 1810, the 34-year-old country was home to 140 breweries that accounted for 183,000 barrels of beer per year. And then by 1873, around the time that Birmingham was founded, it had skyrocketed to 4,131 breweries and 9 million barrels annually. So picture that, and then here we go. Then, as you said, by correct me if I'm wrong, 1907, voters in much of Alabama, but certainly Birmingham, decided to go dry, as they say, and that was a full 13 years before the rest of the country went into Prohibition, which was then no alcohol of any kind, so they said. And,
so they say.
Yeah, so they say. There was a lot of sarsaparilla joints, and sarsaparilla, I guess, I'm not quite sure. I should know that from all the cowboy movies I've watched, but sarsaparilla was almost kind of like, think of like maybe a ginger ale or something, but sometimes I think it was spiked. And then, of course, what did that do? For the next 13 or 14 years in the U.S., you had, underground breweries and liquor makers, whatever things that the mob gets involved. But yet in this area that you for several years lived in, what happened? Was there like an underground market of people producing liquors, or did they really follow that edict of going dry, pretty religiously, no pun intended?
Well, I think there was probably a mix of the two. Taste certainly changed during Prohibition because people couldn't get alcohol so readily. And so they became more adjusted to drinking soda and other substitutes. That's also a big part of why once Prohibition was repealed, some of the more watery, flavorless beers became so popular because people were not used to drinking good beer,
right.
I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But of course there were instances of people getting creative with how they got their alcohol during Prohibition, and I don't think Alabama was any exception to that.
No doubt at all. I'm sure there was some money to be made in the underground market for sure. Birmingham Beer, a heady history of brewing in the Magic City. Carla Jean Whitley joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book is a product of the History Press. www for more information, carlajeanwhittley.com. And again, it's a terrific book and quite an education. I notice History Press has a series of these, I'm sure to varying degrees of success, that where they cover kind of breweries and kind of this type of liquor business throughout several areas, Florida and other parts of the country. So, and even here in Connecticut lately now, microbreweries are springing up like, every day. I think there's a new one starting up, and many of them quite successful. So, that's a good thing. Now, to your knowledge, has there ever been a discovery of beer recipes that maybe were used back in those days? I mean, did anyone ever say, well, maybe they used a secret ingredient, or they didn't use the same type of hops or barley that are used today? I mean, did anybody ever unearth any archaeological recipes that might have been from those early days?
In Birmingham?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge.
No, not to your knowledge. I'd be curious with Mr. Schellinger, and of course there were several others as well, and then eventually he passed on, and I believe then the business fell into hands of his sons, and I don't even think it went on too much longer, partly because of the we'll call it pre-prohibition, before regular. You talked a little bit about the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Again, I was going to ask about the evolution of that. I mean, that was something obviously that was practiced very fervently in all parts of the country. So really, it doesn't sound like they had to mount up a big struggle. I mean, they basically convinced people early on that, hey, this is the devil's drink, and we need to get it under control.
Well, I mean, as you can see from the fact that Birmingham did go dry so early, yeah, I would agree. It couldn't have taken too much work, because they were sure successful at it.
Sure. And just from a history standpoint, again, national prohibition took effect. That was the 18th Amendment in 1920. And then was in effect until, again, through the beginning of the Depression back in the late 20s, through February 1933, when it was rescinded as part of the 21st Amendment. So there's your history lesson for today. Now we fast forward back to, or ahead rather, to the Brew Pub Act of 1992. Now you're thinking, wait a minute. You go dry in 1907 or thereabouts, 1908, and then 1992. When you had moved down there as part of your work assignments, all of a sudden, to go 80 plus years, didn't anybody ever say, look, we should mount a campaign to kind of get with the program? It was like
well, I didn't live in Alabama in '92, and I wasn't of legal drinking age.
No, but I'm saying, but even in the mid 2000s, early first
well, yeah,
decade.
they did. That's exactly how we ended up with everything changing, was thanks to Free the Hops. And Danner Klein, who, I think one of the great irony is perhaps not the right word, but a really amusing detail to me is that so much of this history of beer being limited in the area is because of religion, and it's very unpopular with Southern voters if you approve anything with alcohol. Well, the guy who created the movement Free the Hops is a Christian and a graduate of a Christian school. Go figure.
Samford University, very conservative, I'm told, okay, in Birmingham. Wasn't much of a partier, which kind of like wouldn't seem that he would be the kind of fit for someone who was going to help lead this sort of revolution, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so and now, how did you get involved with a group called Hops, Honeys for Hops? Am I pronouncing that correct?
Hops for Honeys.
I knew it was a 50-50 shot. So there you go. So yes. How did that come about?
I actually became involved with Hops for Honeys when I attended a beer event at the J. Clyde. It was a multi-course beer dinner, and Susan Hartley, Jerry's sister, said to me, "Oh, you need to be in Hops for Honeys." And then she turned to a couple of women and said, "She needs to be in Hops for Honeys." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about or who you are, but the other women, but yeah, tell me more." Well, those women were the wives of the guys who founded Good People Brewing Company, which is now Alabama's oldest brewery, dating back to, I believe, 2009. And they had formed a women's beer club through the brewery. And so we would get together and try different styles. For example, one month we might do stouts and have 3 different examples of stouts plus food paired with it, and talk about the qualities that make a stout and the different characteristics of beer. At the beginning of every year, we would have a session on just that, Beer 101, where we would talk about the ingredients that go into beer. They're pretty simple. And get to know those things rather intimately. So it was a really neat organization and an opportunity for a lot of women to get to know beer better. Some came because their boyfriend was really into beer. Some came because they were really into beer. But it was a really low-key, non-judgmental environment with a lot of education opportunity and a lot of fun.
Now, 2007, to jump ahead again, I know it seems like there's that gap in between where life went on very dry, no pun intended, but 2007.
That's because there is that gap.
Exactly, yeah. Talk about the J. Clyde. Now, that opened up in, 2007?
Yes, and it's preparing for its 10th anniversary just in the next coming months here. So the J. Clyde is located on Cobb Lane, which is a cobblestone, small little 1-block road in Birmingham, near the 5 Points South District, which has a lot of great dining. Jerry Hartley, who opened the J. Clyde, did so because he really fell in love with craft beer during his travels to Germany in particular. And he thought, well, good beer and good food should go together, so I'm going to open this place. And it became almost like an unofficial club for Free the Hops and for anybody who's a fan of craft beer. In the early days, you can mostly only get Great Divide and Rogue and Left Hand because there just weren't that many craft breweries distributing to Alabama. There were certainly others, but those guys were the ones that had a lot of stock available. Because our craft beer laws were so limited, we couldn't serve alcohol or beer with an alcohol by volume of more than 6%. Most craft breweries like to brew some beers that are higher than 6%, and it was not always economical for them to send only part of their offerings to Alabama, so they just wouldn't distribute to the state at all. But over the years, as that changed, the J. Clyde has increased its number of taps and really remained a hub for craft beer drinkers in the state of Alabama.
You touched on that about the different in alcohol by volume content, and of course I'm reading this towards the second half of the book, and I'm like, wait a minute, like Miller or any Anheuser-Busch, any of the big the big ones in the country, having to in effect almost like special brew. So instead of it being, I'm just using a term, let's say 40 proof, which it wouldn't be. You mentioned the breakdown. They would have to make 0.5 or whatever it was, 5.6 or whatever. And I'm thinking they're probably like, this is costing us too much time and money to have to specialize just for this market. Even though Alabama's a fairly large state, I wonder if some of them even finally said, look, we're not even going to go there. Like you get some of your more modern ones like Yingling and so many of the others. They're probably like, you know what, we can't take the time needed to, start making specialty orders, which is in effect what they'd be doing for the state.
Yeah, so the limit increased up to 6% in the 90s, and that eradicated some of that from the big folks like Coors and Budweiser. But, even breweries like Dogfish Head, that just started distributing to Alabama within about the past month. Now, mind you, it's more complicated than just the laws. Dogfish Head could have some time ago, but the breweries also have to have the capacity to serve the market. But you're exactly right that it's not a good business interest to create a specialty product for a state of about 4.5 million people. And up until the past few years, about a third of the counties in Alabama were at least partly dry. So that meant that either the county was totally dry, that it was dry on Sundays, or that it was dry, but there was maybe a city in the county that was wet. Now, no county in the state is entirely dry anymore.
And just to show you how quickly that changed, and again, now we fast forward to 2015, just as literally Carla Jean is wrapping up the book at the time, 25 out of the 67 state counties were still dry. And as you said, to whatever degree, perhaps only on Sunday, perhaps totally dry. I mean, that's just like someone, an area that is living in like a time warp. It's just amazing to me. You know, I think people, anyone who sees this program will be like, you're kidding me, right? Are they talking 1915 or 1815? But again, it just, at that point, I mean, was it still a religious issue, do you think? Or was it just that, you know, nobody cared to fight the fight until you guys came along?
Well, part of it's lobbying and organizations that don't see that as being in their best interests. But as I mentioned, it is highly unpopular in the South for a legislator to support anything related to alcohol for religious reasons. So a lot of people would vote against it, even if they thought that alcohol is okay, even though, you know, wine's alcohol by volume limit was 13%, I believe. That even though you could buy a bottle of Everclear down at the ABC store, you don't want to be the guy who passes the alcohol legislation because you might not get votes next time.
Wow.
So,
there you go.
And now I will point out, in Alabama's defense, we're not alone in that. Up until, I believe it was 2013, you've got the timeline in front of you, not me, but I believe up until 2013, it was illegal to homebrew in Alabama. Well, we were the 49th state to legalize it. We beat Mississippi by just a hair.
Yes, it was a matter of when the vote was held. Yeah, exactly. I think another less than a month and you would have been dead last. Yeah.
Yes, and you know, Utah has lots of restrictive laws as well. So we're certainly not alone in this, but man, have we seen some rapid change.
Now, I have to jump ahead now that you're in Colorado, your new assignment. How is Colorado in that regard? Again, is that, would we call it a temperance state? Or, I mean, or do you find that things are much more open as far as the drinking of alcohol and beer in particular in Colorado compared to Alabama?
You know, Colorado has one of the best beer scenes in the country.
Sure.
So things here have definitely come a very long way from, you know, Prohibition days. But Glenwood Springs, where I live now, also went dry in several years before Prohibition. And Colorado has its own sets of rules. You can't buy alcohol above, I think it might be 3.2% out inside the grocery store. So I can go buy my groceries, and then I have to go to a liquor store to get my craft beer.
Right, and that used to be here until recently. In the last 5 or 6 years, that has changed as well. But again, it's you know, not everything is uniformed. But yet, I got the impression from reading the book, not only from your kind of group meetings, but you know, as the lobbying was going on, that there definitely was a lot of folks that were, you know, just dying to, you know, pop a top and sit down and enjoy it, or have something maybe on draft, or as you said, a specialty beer. So again, it's I think it was just the people just either didn't know or didn't care to mount the effort to do the lobbying work that had to be done. Because again, it took almost 10 years to get that far.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and you know, it was started by a group of volunteers. They hired a professional lobbyist, but the guys who founded Free the Hops were not in it for money. They were in it for freedom and for a good beer.
Now, we talked earlier about the Brew Pub Act of '92, and then of course some businesses did open up, but then by 2011, pretty much all brew pubs had closed. And so again, what was the holdup? There were still too many restrictions that kept these folks, you know, from being able to turn a profit.
Exactly. The ABV law was a significant issue there. And in addition to that, some of the brewery stipulations delineated different issues for brew pubs versus breweries.
Here, I have some water, Carla.
Editing. Hang on, let me get my my Buffalo Rock
There you go.
ginger ale
Well,
here.
we'll show a shot of the book while we're reintroducing Carla Jean Whitley, joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book Birmingham, I beg your pardon, I'm slipping into my Great Britain again. Birmingham Beer, A Heady History of Brewing in the Magic City by History Press. And again, for more information, www.carlajeanwhitley.com. All right, everybody's voice is moistened and ready to go. So breweries too, another thing I got out of the book too, both there and even places when I go on vacation, they become like tourist destinations. I mean,
absolutely. That's a big part of why people were so invested in passing this legislation, because it's not just about having a good beer, it's also about economic development. For example, last weekend I went to Salt Lake City, Utah for a conference and made a point of stopping at a brewery while I was there. I went to Epic Brewing, which also has a location in Denver. And when I went in there, I said, I want one of every beer that you do not distribute to Colorado. And
not to drink at that point, but to take home with you, correct? For my own clarification. Okay, very good.
Yes, I brought those home as a gift to a friend. And that's one anecdote, but that sort of thing is really common. In fact, I think I dropped $40 at that brewery that night between dinner, the beer I had there, and the beers I brought home. And that's money that's going back into that local economy. And so for the longest time, by restricting so much of this, Alabama was really missing out on that income.
And then now that act passed in June 2011. So that, of course, helped immensely there. You mentioned, too, about neighborhood revitalization. You had one where there was a brewery in Alabama called Avondale, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the work of those folks, as well as Twin Key Homes and others, helped to not only establish that brewery, but also then kind of revitalize a suburb of Birmingham, correct?
Yes, that neighborhood has really taken off in recent years. There was a lot of groundwork that had been laid before the brewery ever moved into the neighborhood, but because the brothers who owned the brewery also had the Twin Key Homes, had the opportunity to bring other businesses into the area and to remodel and really make things look beautiful, it's taken off. There are tons of restaurants, bars, concert venues, coffee shops within a several block stretch now. And back in even the mid 2000s, you would not have really hung out in that part of town at all.
Now, another bill, again, there's a lot of work that is done in this 10 to 15 year period. Another one, too, if you could touch on from what you recall back in the last several years, the gourmet bottle bill, basically that had to do with increasing, as you touched on earlier, the container size limit. So again, they were limiting, as we talked again, so that even the hometown breweries could not brew. I think the limit was, 16 point ounces? Or was it as high as 25.4? I think it was
16.
16. So then they were able to get that passed. But so, I mean, here, you can buy a 6-pack, you can buy a case, you can buy a keg. And I can remember even in college days, you could buy, a bottle that was about yay big. Well, obviously not there for many years.
Yes. And so that also increased the number of out-of-state breweries that could distribute to Alabama as well, because a lot of these specialty beers are available only in larger format in what's called a bomber or 750 milliliter bottle. And in preparing that legislation, folks were also really careful to word it such that you could not just go to the convenience store and buy a 40 of cheap beer, because none of this was intended to be about getting drunk. And from the viewpoint of many, that's what a 40 is.
Gotcha.
It was a quick way to get drunk. And so these laws were really carefully crafted and took into consideration the constituents and people's concerns. So that really did open up things in Alabama in yet another way.
Now that bill passed in its second try back in 2012, and then the amazing thing, again, what pressures he might have had, I don't know, but was then signed into law by a governor at that time who did not even drink. So again, there's in itself, I found that kind of amazing, because a lot of times people that couldn't relate to that might say, well, oh no, I don't want anything to do with that. But that was, now is that governor still in office to the best of your knowledge, or did he already serve out his?
That was Bill Riley, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, Riley is gone. Governor Bentley is in office now.
Gotcha. We have a quote here, again, related to the gourmet bottle bill, by a gentleman who was with Free the Hops legislative group. The organization's Dan Roberts told the Associated Press, quote, between 2008 and now, it's really a whole new world. And when you think about it, in the ensuing not even 2 decades, the amount of work that has been accomplished. And so in many ways, you were there not only for that, again, you then brought the whole thing to life with this book. And I'm sure the folks down there probably say, oh, she's the one that's reminding us how things were and now how they are now. And they're probably all calling them heathens for all I know. But hey, you know, it's
I'm sure those people exist, but fortunately they haven't emailed me.
There, thank goodness. There you go. Let's see. Then we talked. You brought up earlier about the Right to Brew organization. They led a fight to pass a bill legislating home brewing back in 2011. And I wanted to throw this in. I thought it was pretty neat history tidbit. President Washington, back in the day, so it must have been up in Monticello, or maybe it was in the original capital, New York City. Thomas Jefferson, I beg your pardon, wasn't Jefferson Monticello? I don't know. I'm getting wherever Washington was in those days. Mount Vernon, I think it was.
There you go.
And also more recent vintage, former President Barack Obama, all had their little home brewing. So that's pretty cool. And I think in at least 2 out of the 3 cases, they actually did that while they were in office. So I thought that was pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just like cooking. It's chemistry taking place in creating an edible product. And so it's funny, or to me anyway, that homebrewing was illegal in Alabama for so long, because it is such a popular hobby. And really, you know, I mean, moderation in all things. It's not legal to drive drunk regardless of where you got the beer. So it's neat to see how these things have come so far in the rich tradition that people are now allowed to participate in.
And even the home brewing, as you touch in the book, under the category Right to Brew, which again was also the name of the organization, beginning in 1998, I guess when they started tracking this info, the American Brewers Association estimated that brewing generated upwards of $200 million annually, and with a rate growth, say that 3 times, of about 40% annually. So, I mean, that is incredible. I mean, you see different things like in novelty stores about brew kits, whatever, but I think sometimes it's like making wine. You know, it's a tremendous amount of work with the casks and the grapes and having to do that, and maybe not so much with the beer, but I think it's kind of a thing where they probably say, you know, it never quite tastes like, you know, the ones that the experts make.
Well, but it's also how you become an expert.
Gotcha.
Many of the brewers who now have breweries in Birmingham started out as home brewers.
Exactly, and that in reading the book, there were several again that then also got involved with the lobbying effort as well. That you know, really came into it, like the gentleman you mentioned earlier, who really probably didn't know the first thing, but then immersed him or herself in it, and then look what happened. So that's, yeah, never say never. You know, the future brewers of today, who knows? Maybe listening to us right now. We never know. Talk a little bit more about Hops for Honey. Now, that was established in 2010. At that point, I don't even know if perhaps you were already like contemplating doing the book, but kind of fill us in again on what was the purpose of that. Again, that was kind of a women's only organization.
Yeah, it's just really simply craft beer education. It was inspired by similar groups at other breweries, including Left Hand Brewing in Colorado, and just created a collegial atmosphere for women to learn about beer.
There you go. And now I'm very impressed, especially early on, your knowledge and expertise. So again, you've come a long way. Oh. There we go. Oh, there you go. All right. I thought it was a UFO. Okay. No, there you go. We thought we lost you there for a minute. Your knowledge and your expertise about the brewing industry. So, not to mention your pursuit. So, I think like myself, I like going to wineries and different things like that. But so when you go to travel in business or pleasure, you get a chance. You kind of say, hey, let me try some of the local wares here.
Oh, yeah, I do as often as I can. In fact, there is a social app called Untapped where you can check in and rate the beers that you're consuming. I only download it when I'm out of town. And usually when I'm going to a new brewery, I'll order a flight of beer. So the app often yells at me and says, why don't you slow down a little bit? I'm like, no, dude, I just split 4 glasses that were that big. But it's a great way to get a taste of a certain place and get a read for a local business.
Carla Jean Whitley joining us for the remaining moments here on Studio 411. The book Birmingham Beer, A Heady History of Brewing in the Magic City, published by the History Press. For more information, www.carlajeanwhitley.com. All right, in the remaining few moments, I was hoping to get to a few of these things. Tell me, your new endeavor now in Colorado, working for the Glenwood Springs Post-Independent as the outdoors and entertainment editor. What's your take on the future of print news? I know I still read a print paper. I like to tuck it under my arm and take it with me. I don't need my phone all the time. So what's your take?
You're certainly not alone in that, but it's also valuable when people are willing to pay for that, so support your print media. From a professional standpoint, I'm platform agnostic. You can have the news on whatever platform you want, as far as I'm concerned. Personally, I like to read it in print. We stare at screens all day long, and quite frankly, I just get tired of it. I'm only 35, but my eyes can't take that. And so I think it's interesting to see the way that different people interact with their media outlets in different markets. Where I am now is a resort community in a rural county. And so it's really easy to lose cell phone service here. So yes, we see a lot of traffic coming to us from mobile devices, but you step outside of service and then you lose your news connection. So perhaps as a result, we've got a really remarkable relationship with print readers. People love the paper, pick it up all around town, and that's a great feeling.
There you go. I love it.
I love seeing the magic of the design on the page as well.
That's right. Now tell me, the new term in these last period of time we've had, is there really fake news, or again, give me your take on that. That seems to be a propaganda tool to kind of almost demean print journalism, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think if it's fake news, then it's actually called lying.
Yeah.
We've seen instances across the country of people accusing legitimate news outlets of producing fake news. For example, here in Colorado, the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel saw a state legislator accuse it of creating fake news because they disagreed with an editorial. Now, an editorial is, by definition, an opinion. But this legislator did not care for that and, threw that term at the paper. The paper didn't take too kindly to that, has threatened a lawsuit for libel or slander. I believe it was a written or a spoken accusation, but anyhow. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, no, I don't think it's funny when people throw that term around. I think that news is serious business, and the job of the media is to inform the people. So it is, in fact, in the U.S. citizenry's best interest for us to do our jobs and do them to the best of our ability.
I have to ask because I said, oh, I remember this lady back in the day when she was kind of a comedy writer / comedian. If I understood correctly, when you were in your waning days in Alabama, you got to interview someone that I would love to interview myself, Fannie Flagg.
Yes, she was a doll. I actually interviewed her a couple of times.
Nice. We'll be speaking, Carla, because I would love to get her on this program because she is. I mean, I thought she was funny, and I've never read Fried Green Tomatoes. I understand that took her in a totally career-altering path, which is if nothing else brought her more to people's attention, whatever. But I saw part of the interview or the written part as well, and I thought it was quite a nice coup on your part to get a Miss Flagg on your byline there. So I thought that was pretty good.
Well, thanks.
Harper Lee, who passed away a short time ago, one of your favorite authors. I read the book To Kill a Mockingbird. That was probably required reading back in the day. I did not read the book that came out a few years ago that was sitting on a shelf for umpteen times. But what about her in the little time we have left? What about her that maybe motivated you to become a writer?
Well, I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird as assigned reading in, I believe, 9th grade. And I grew up in Florida, although I'm an Alabama native. And so when we read To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the several things that drew me to it was the fact that she, too, was an Alabamian and that she was also a female. And I thought, oh, I could do that. Look, Harper Lee, she's just like me. Now, of course, as a 14-year-old, you don't really recognize the difference between a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and yourself. Wouldn't I be so lucky to be just like Harper Lee? But I do love and continue to be drawn toward the lyrical way that she describes Alabama, both in its beauty and its disgrace, and the clear eye she turns towards some of the state's more challenging issues. It's not a book that really beats around the bush on some of the issues of racism. And while I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect book, we could certainly nitpick any book, I think that is just such a just compelling story that really challenged me as a teen to think. And that's what any good story should do, challenge us to think and bring us closer to one another.
Absolutely. A couple of quick questions in our remaining moments here with Carla Jean Whitley on Studio 411. I saw on your social media, and I said I have to ask her, because I actually corresponded with this person I'm going to bring up, and she is elderly now, and sent a nice note that she would love to, but passed on doing the program. Someone commented that you had an Eleanor Donahue look. Now, I don't know if they expect you to remember that, but do you even know who Eleanor Donahue is?
I do remember that because that comment just came earlier this week, and I thought, well, I have no idea who that is.
Okay, Eleanor Donahue, which, I thought, I said, my guess is you're going to say exactly what you did. Eleanor Donahue played Betty on an old, wonderful, successful sitcom called Father Knows Best, that ran from the 50s into the early 60s. You might know her from reruns, because I have a feeling you probably grew up watching this other show. She was the pharmacist the first year of the Andy Griffith Show.
I did not grow up watching the Andy Griffith Show either.
Yeah, I mean, no, you wouldn't have known it in its heyday, but in reruns. But
I just never watched it.
Oh, okay, because I thought, I thought that was required viewing in the South, from what I've always been told. But that's who Eleanor Donahue is, just to kind of fill you in. So you'll have to pull her image up and then say to that person, I look like Eleanor Donahue? Okay, and she's very attractive. No knock on Eleanor, but I just...
Well, then I'll take it.
That's right, yeah, no, but I just said, no, she's going to say to me, you know what, I don't know who that woman is. Someone you do know, and I've only started getting into the show in the last couple of months and just snippets, but I have to sit down with a DVD or something, is I understand you're a fan of a show that's set here in fictional Connecticut called The Gilmore Girls.
Oh, Yes, that's a great show.
So if you ever come up here, I'll take you to where the supposed exteriors are shot, because I don't think there's a real town. It's fictitious, but it's in the northwest corner of Connecticut, not far from where we are here, maybe less than an hour away. So there you go.
Yes, I think that's made hundreds of thousands of women long to visit Connecticut.
Oh,
even
there you go.
No, Stars Hollow is not real.
See? So we need all the tourist destination monies we can get. And then lastly, in the remaining couple of minutes, a couple of things. Skydiving, please tell me you didn't jump out of a plane.
I did about 13 months ago. February is not my favorite month, and so my roommate and I decided we needed something to look forward to, so we decided to go skydiving.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. And then what was that like? I mean, former President George H.W. Bush, I think in 80, 85, 90, whatever, I don't know if he's done it in the last couple of years, but, he amazed people by jumping, I believe, with someone else, but then they had a camera to videotape it. I mean, what is that feeling? Were your nails scraping on the plane interior wall, and did they have to just kick you out the plane?
No, it was far less scary than I would have expected. And, with the sensation when you first jump, when you're in free fall, is a little bit like being underwater, because the rush of wind is so intense and your ears are popping. But then as the canopy opens and you start to drift toward the ground, it's really serene. It is just a beautiful way to drift over an area, and we jumped above a town that I used to live in. I won't name it. I'm not a real big fan of the place, and I kept joking, well, this is the best way I've ever seen this place.
I thought maybe you were hovering over a brewery, perhaps. See, that would have been a good tie-in with the book. Okay, no, all right.
That would have been a nice way to end a jump, wouldn't it?
Another thing that I have not done, and I don't know if we've lost Carla. Maybe. There she is. There she is. I understand you got a tattoo. Would you care to elaborate on that? Or was that not in the shape of a parachute?
No, I have a very small tattoo of a semicolon on my right wrist. I'd show it to you, but you're probably not even going to be able to see it. It's so subtle. See, it's right up there.
Okay, yeah.
Probably can't even
The
pick it
viewer
out.
might think it's like a pimple, but I take your word for it. Okay.
Yeah. And it's something that I've thought about getting for a long time, partly because I get really irritated when people misuse semicolons, partly because I need the reminder to slow down, to take a breath, to take some time for myself. But also in recent years, semicolon tattoos have become sort of a movement in suicide awareness and prevention. And while suicidal tendencies are not something that I personally struggle with, I have plenty of friends who have been affected by that, and I do have depression, and I'm quick to speak out about the value in getting help. And so I thought, well, that's one more reason to go ahead and get this permanently inked on my body.
There you go. That's terrific. All right, I'm going to ask you a series of quick questions in our remaining couple of minutes. Let me see here. Favorite word?
Plethora.
Okay. Funniest comedian ever?
I'm really not into comedians.
Okay.
I don't know.
How do you relax?
Read.
Okay, very good. Let's see. A bucket list trip?
Oh, man. I keep doing the things on my bucket list, which made my dad really worried last year. He said, "Are you dying or something?" I was like, "No, Daddy, I just don't see any reason not to go ahead and do it." I really want to go to Scotland. Not for any particular reason except that it's beautiful.
Gotcha. What were Sundays like growing up? Because originally you grew up in your formative years in Jacksonville, Florida?
Yes,
Okay.
mostly in Florida.
Yeah.
Sundays don't really stand out to me in any particular way. I would spend most of the weekend curled up somewhere reading, and I've always been such an immersive reader that I would often forget that I was not the character. So, for example, if I read a book about someone with leukemia, I would get up from the book and think like, oh, I feel so... Oh, wait, no, I'm fine. I forgot. I'm cool.
There you go. Person you wish you could have met?
Harper Lee.
Harper Lee. All right. Let's see. Best advice you ever got from a career standpoint?
Oh, you can always change your mind.
Okay. That was anyone, just someone that you perhaps were a colleague with or educator?
Yes. No, can I also, hang on, I want to back up here and add, yes, I want to meet Harper Lee, but I'm still actively mourning Nora Ephron's death.
Yes.
And it's been almost 5 years.
I know. And now, lastly, before we head out, if you knew you had exactly 2 years to live, how would you spend them? 10 seconds.
Reading, writing, drinking coffee, hanging out with my cats.
Okay, very good. Well, at least she said coffee, folks. So I gotta give her kudos there. All right. Anyway, wonderful to have you back with us. Hang in there for a second. But again, the book Birmingham Beer: A Heady History of Brewing in the Magic City in Alabama. All right. And now Carla, of course, former features writer with the Alabama Media Group, now an an entertainment editor at Glenwood Springs Post-Independent. How is that going for you? Good?
It's great. I love it. And we've got some exciting things coming down the pike.
Very good. So we will keep an eye on that. And again, now, real quick, any ideas for another book, or I shouldn't hold my breath?
One of these days, but right now I'm just patiently waiting for the right story.
There you go. Terrific, terrific. Well, glad you're doing well down there. And again, as always, our thanks for joining us here on Studio 411. Hang in there for a second, and we'd like to thank you for joining us today on Studio 411. Carla Jean Whitley. For more information on Carla, carlajeanwhittley.com. We look forward to having you back again, not only having Carla back, but having you back out there on Studio 411. So for now, Larry Dasilva wishing you the best, and we look forward to meeting up again. Take care.